This happened back in 1984. I was 22 years old, living in Sunnyvale, California. I just started my new job at the Electromagnetic Systems Lab, Inc. I was introduced to the rest of the staff, including Richard, a 35-year-old electrical engineer. He seemed very friendly. But as the weeks were passing by, Richard started asking me out more and more. I wasn't looking for a relationship with a coworker, so I let him down kindly. However, that didn't make him stop. He was relentless. At my desk, I would find love letters written by him expressing his love to me. He would bring me boxes of chocolates and flowers. I was starting to feel very uncomfortable. I was considering quitting my job just to get away from him. Was he ever gonna leave me alone? What should I do? Things were getting more intense. One day, I approached him and asked him to stop buying me gifts. He gave me a sinister smile and said he won't stop asking me out until I accept, or until the day he died. I felt shivers all over my body. No one has ever treated me like this before. It was a total nightmare. The gifts, the letters, and the advances continued. One day, I was in my car leaving work. I started noticing a white car following me around. I took different routes to try and evade him, but after 10 minutes, the car was still behind me. I decided to pick up the pace. I was driving faster and I managed to get away from him. But this wasn't the only time I saw this white car. It happened again. This time, the car followed me all the way home. Richard stepped out of it. He was standing there and staring at me. He had found out where I lived. I rushed into my house without saying a word to him. I had to move several times because he always found out where I lived. At work, he went through my personal files under false pretenses. He befriended the custodial staff and made copies of the keys from my desk and files at work. It has been 4 years. I have received over 200 letters from Richard. I was afraid to tell anyone before, but I couldn't take it anymore. So I went to Human Resources to file a complaint against him. He was fired in order to stay away from me and attend counseling sessions. I felt relieved, but I knew that it was not the end of it. Stalkers don't stop until they get what they want. One day after work, I opened my car door, only to realize someone was standing behind me. It was Richard. He shoved me hard against the car door. He looked me in the eyes and whispered, "You are going to regret that." He walked away and I immediately drove to the police station. I filed a temporary restraining order against him. And things got worse. The day before our scheduled hearing, Richard arrived at my work, armed. I locked myself in my office. I could hear everything, screaming, running, and rounds of ammunition. My heart was beating fast. He was looking for me. I was next, I thought. I could hear footsteps getting closer to my office door, and I froze. I couldn't move. I didn't want to make any noise. He would hear any movement. Suddenly, I was struck in the shoulder by a bullet that Richard fired through the door. I was lying on the floor. My breathing was slowing down. I wasn't gonna make it. The police had a 5-hour standoff with Richard. I regained consciousness and I miraculously survived after being rescued. 7 people lost their lives. Richard was found guilty of first-degree murder. He's currently sitting on death row in San Quentin. The creepiest part of all is that he has written one final letter to me, stating that I finally won. I was a 41-year-old salesman working at a retail outlet specializing in men's business suits. I'd just come out of a divorce and life had been hard. One afternoon, this beautiful, elegant, middle-aged woman walked into the store. There was something familiar about her, but maybe it was just my imagination. I wanted to talk to her, but I didn't want to come off like some kind of creep. Surprisingly, she approached me first and said, "You probably think I'm in the wrong store." I was confused by her words. I cleared my throat and answered, "I'm sorry?" She reminded me that she's inside of a men's clothing store. I told her that there were pantsuits and jackets for ladies available. She said that she was there looking for a tuxedo for her son. I was even more confused because it was the dead of winter. Proms are held in June or late May. Why did she want a suit now? The woman told me that her son's school was holding the prom earlier that year, so I showed her some of the most popular suits. She walked so closely to me I could smell her floral perfume. She paid for a suit and started asking me about my life and hobbies. She introduced herself as Andrea. She never stopped smiling since she came through the door. I ended up asking her out. Andrea was thrilled and told me about a bar close by, and that we would meet up later that night. I locked up the store and walked to the parking lot. Andrea was waiting for me in a small blue station wagon. I was feeling nervous on our journey to the bar. My hands were sweating. I haven't been with a woman in a while. I started talking about the tuxedo, but she remained silent. She stopped smiling too. I didn't think much of it. She was driving and had to concentrate. But why did she put a purse on her lap? After what seemed like an hour, I started getting concerned. She told me the bar was close by, but we've just gotten onto a highway interchange. I asked Andrea if the bar was out of town. She ignored my question and drove faster. She then removed her left hand from the steering wheel. She reached into her purse, and I was really getting nervous. Suddenly, she yells at me, "You really don't remember me?" I had no idea what she was talking about. I said to her, "I don't know any Andrea." She frowned at me and opened her purse. My heart froze in my chest. She took out a knife. I yelled at her to let me out of the car. She looked at me and said, "My real name is Alicia. My real name is Alicia Moretto. Do you remember me now?" At first, I didn't remember the name, but then it came back to me. She told me to open the glove box, and I did as she commanded, and I found hundreds of pages of paper. I started reading some of them. I recognized that they were stories I wrote about my stalker in my late teens. She was a mentally disturbed woman who was stalking me while I was working at a coffee shop. She knew my schedule and where I lived. One time, she even waited for me in my house. I was trembling. I couldn't believe that the friendly Andrea is Alicia. I couldn't swallow. She was peering over me. I apologized to her and asked her to let me out. She was still holding the knife. Even if I attempted to grab it from her, she could cut me or crash the car. I looked out the window and saw no lights. Only tall trees and bleak wilderness. "It took me years to get to you," she said. I looked at my watch. We've been on the road for 3 hours. We sat in silence. She then pulled over and we sat in the darkness. I apologized again, but she didn't look at me and didn't say anything. I told her that she should just go ahead and stab me and get it over with. "You deserve to feel what I feel every day," she said huskily. Suddenly, she took the knife and slit her own throat. I opened the car door and ran away from the scene as fast as I could. 2 weeks later, cops showed up at my home asking questions. I explained to them what had happened, and they had enough evidence to prove that it wasn't a homicide. But Andrea, or Alicia's words, still stick with me today. It first started in 1965. I was a 9th grade algebra teacher. One of my students started getting obsessed with me. He wrote me inappropriate letters about how he wished to lock me up in his basement. I reported him to the school, and he was immediately expelled. Years later, the boy who stalked me was no longer a boy. He was a man. He pitched up at my house unannounced. I cringed at the sight of him. Why did he know where I lived? I asked him what he wanted, and he replied, "You." I was baffled and told him to go away. He did, but that wasn't the last of him. I started noticing him in grocery shops, pharmacies, and in the streets. No matter where I went, he was there. One evening, I was cooking dinner for my 6-year-old daughter and me. It was raining outside. I was in the kitchen alone and my daughter was watching TV. Suddenly, the power went out. I panicked and ran to my daughter, but my stalker was standing with her, with his hand held over her mouth. I begged him to let her go. He told me to do exactly what he said, or he would hurt her. And I obeyed. He bound our hands. He then told us to get into his car. My heart was starting to race. He drove us to an abandoned building. My daughter started crying. He took us into his basement, and he kept us there for nearly 8 weeks. I thought we would never make it out alive. I kept on saying to my daughter, "We'll make it out." But she didn't believe me. I didn't believe it either. Every night he would come down to the basement, bind, gag me, and take me to his room. He recorded us. Afterwards, he threw me back in the basement with my daughter. Some nights, he would put me in a separate room from her as punishment. He would lock her in a small closet. We had to escape. But the only time to do so was when he was at work. One afternoon, I managed to untie the rope around my hands with my teeth. I climbed through the window. I ran to the nearest road and waved. The car stopped. I explained to the driver exactly what happened. He helped me break my daughter out. My stalker was arrested at his work. The trial was held in 1981. Before he was sentenced to jail, he attacked me with a knife in court. My face was disfigured permanently. He received 70 years in prison for other murders he had committed and for kidnapping us. But what haunts me till today is that he told me he'll come back for me one day.